see you upstairs. Hey, Harry, when you go upstairs.
Amazing. And that became As Ever, which you launched about a year and a half ago, and went through a rebrand. I'm curious, you had one of your ventures was a
Something has shifted inside the palace, and this time, it is not a rumor, it is not a tabloid cycle or a carefully planted briefing from a single disgruntled source. This is a movement. Quiet, coordinated, and more authentic than anything that has happened before it. New allegations have surfaced about Meghan Markle, and the reaction from senior royals who have maintained careful neutrality for years has been unlike anything this family has publicly demonstrated since the Sussex departure. They have turned. Not one of them. Not two. Several. Simultaneously. In ways that the palace's careful communications machinery is struggling to contain. Something unusual has surfaced, and everyone inside the walls can't deny knowing about it. The allegations. What has surfaced and why it changed everything. Let's begin with what actually surfaced. Because the British royal family has been dealing with Meghan Markle stories for the better part of a decade. Negative ones, damaging ones. Stories about staff mistreatment, protocol violations, alleged manipulation of the people around her, and a sustained pattern of behavior inside the palace that multiple sources over multiple years have described in terms that are anything but flattering. None of those stories produced the kind of effect that is brewing now. These senior royals maintained their neutrality through all of it. Through the Oprah interview, through the Netflix documentary, through the memoir that burned the family's bridges in ways that should have been irreversible. Through the yacht allegations and the staff complaints, and the years of sustained negative coverage that would have collapsed the reputation of almost any other public figure operating at this level, they remained neutral. Publicly, with the discipline of an institution that understands that breaking that neutrality would do much more harm than good. So the question that matters more than any other right now is this. What has surfaced that is different enough in character and serious enough in substance to produce a reaction that years of accumulated damage did not? The answer right there is the nature of the allegation and the context of what it represents. Previous allegations against Meghan, however damaging individually, operated primarily in the territory of behavior and character. How she treated staff, how she navigated palace relationships, the manner of her departure, and the calculated nature of the public narrative she constructed around it. These aren't trivial matters, but serious ones. They are ultimately the kind that an institution can process through the machinery of private management and public neutrality without reaching the point of a formal or visible response. What has surfaced now is different in character. Sources familiar with the allegations describe claims that move beyond behavior and character into territory with a different kind of institutional and potentially legal weight. The specifics involve accounts from individuals who are newly willing to speak, who have been sitting on information that intersects with Meghan's conduct in ways that touch on the interests of the institution itself, rather than just the personal dynamics of a difficult relationship between a royal and the family she married into. They kept a lot to themselves all those years. Two areas of particular sensitivity have been described by sources. The first involves financial matters, specifically questions around the use of resources and relationships connected to the royal institution during the period when Meghan was still formally a working member of the royal family. The nature of these questions has not been fully detailed in public reporting, but sources describe them as specific enough to have generated formal attention from people inside the institution whose responsibility it is to pay attention to exactly this kind of matter. The second area is more personal and, in some ways, more explosive. It involves accounts from individuals who were in close proximity to Meghan during key periods of her time inside the palace. Accounts that address not just her behavior towards staff and colleagues, but the specific nature of her private conduct in circumstances that the public narrative around her has always presented in a very different light. These are not anonymous forum posts. They are not the recycled claims of hostile commentators looking for a new angle on an old story. These are genuine stories. Sources familiar with the investigation describe individuals who have provided specific, detailed, corroborated accounts. Accounts that have been examined with the kind of scrutiny that responsible reporting on claims of this nature requires. And accounts truthful enough to debase every other claim that comes side by side with it. The timing of their emergence is not accidental. Several of the individuals who are now speaking were not willing to do so previously. The reasons for their previous silence are best described as camouflage. What changed is what has been gradually changing across multiple fronts simultaneously. The Sussex brand has weakened. The legal infrastructure that once made silence feel necessary has become less effective as the commercial and political relationships that powered it have themselves contracted. The protection that proximity to a globally powerful royal narrative once offered to the people maintaining silence has eroded to the point where the calculation around speaking has shifted. And some of those people have different permutations altogether. Now, here is the dimension of this that explains most directly why the senior royals have responded as they have that no one saw coming. Several of them apparently knew, not the full picture. Not the specific details of every account that has since emerged, but quite enough to make their judgments, enough to have formed private views about the situation that their public neutrality has never reflected. Enough to have been carrying across the years of managed distance and awareness of things that made the public performance of family unity around Harry's choices more difficult internally than it ever appeared externally. The emergence of these allegations publicly, with the corroboration and the detail that sources describe, has done something to the senior royals who were already carrying private knowledge. It has removed the justification for continued neutrality, because neutrality in the face of claims you privately know to have substance is a different thing from neutrality in the face of claims you genuinely cannot assess. The first is a choice about institutional management. The second is a requirement of basic fairness. Once the allegations reach the level of documented, corroborated, publicly emerging claims of genuine seriousness, the choice to maintain the appearance of institutional neutrality stopped being a defensible institutional position for people who had private reasons to know it was not a neutral situation. That is an unusual shift, not a sudden discovery of new information by people who were previously without it. A shift in what the publicly available information now requires of people who are already in possession of more than the public had access to. And the reaction that shift has produced across multiple senior royals simultaneously is the clearest signal yet that what has surfaced is not another tabloid cycle. It is something that the people who know the most about this family and this woman have been waiting with varying degrees of patience to see the light. Something that takes a different turn entirely. Something that cannot, once it has been seen and documented and corroborated at this level, be unseen. The palace has not made an official statement. It will not. That is not how the institution communicates these things. It communicates them through the behavior of the people inside it, through the accumulation of shifts, withdrawals, and turnbacks that tell you more than any press release ever could. And right now, the whole shift is painting a different picture. The benefit of the doubt that kept certain senior royals publicly neutral has been withdrawn, and from the looks of things, it is not coming back. The senior royals who turned, how and what it cost them.
Now, it is my distinguished honor to introduce someone that I think you'll all be very...
Less than a month on the new job, Meghan is still getting the hang of royal protocol.
Not all turns inside a royal family look the same. Sometimes they are different. Some are loud, suddenly. the kind that produces headlines and formal statements, and the particular institutional earthquake of a senior figure going publicly on record in a way that cannot be walked back. Those turns are rare. The institution's entire communications philosophy is built around avoiding them. The turns playing out now are far different from those. They are the other kind, the quieter kind, the kind that are legible to everyone inside those walls and to anyone outside them who is fluent in the language the monarchy uses when it needs to communicate something it will never officially confirm. They are happening through withdrawal, through the specific removal of courtesies and warmth and the kinds of small but meaningful gestures of inclusion that senior royals extend to people they consider within their circle of genuine regard. Through the subtle but unmistakable repositioning of bodies and attention at shared occasions. Through means that most people are not aware of, and through the briefings. They carefully channeled communications to trusted journalists from sources who are identified only as senior royals, whose fingerprints on a story communicate everything about its provenance to the people who read these things for a living. Let's review the specific figures' positions that have shifted. Princess Anne is the most straightforward. Her turn is not new in its private substance, it is new in its public expression. Anne has never been someone whose warmth toward Meghan was extensive or convincing to those who knew how to read her, but she maintained, as the institution required, a professional surface that kept her private views from becoming a visible public position. She knew her place and maintained it. That surface, sources describe, has become considerably thinner in the wake of the new allegations. Anne is now allowing her private assessment to be visible in ways she previously managed, not through statements, but through presence and absence, through the particular quality of how she occupies the same spaces as conversations about Meghan and Harry, through intermediaries who are close enough to her to carry the genuine weight of her position without requiring her to state it formally. The shift in Anne's visible stance tells a different story. She is the longest-serving working royal, the member of the family whose record of service is the most unimpeachable and whose standing inside the institution is the most foundational. When Anne's private assessment becomes visible, it carries the weight of someone who has seen the full arc of the situation from a position of genuine institutional authority, and has arrived at a conclusion that her public neutrality can no longer comfortably accommodate. The second figure is quite surprising, and the surprise is what makes it unique. Sources describe a senior royal whose previous relationship with the Sussex situation was notably warmer than Anne's. Someone who had maintained not just formal neutrality, but genuine private ambivalence. Who had been willing, in certain contexts and with certain trusted interlocutors, to see this situation with a degree of complexity that acknowledged both the institution's failures and the Sussex grievances as things that existed simultaneously, rather than requiring a choice between them. That ambivalence, sources describe, has resolved in one direction, away from the Sussexes, and the resolution was apparently produced directly by the substance of what has recently surfaced. This is the turning that carries the most institutional weight of any described in the current situation, because it is not the confirmation of a position that was always there beneath the surface. It is a genuine change, a person who was genuinely uncertain, who had extended genuine benefit of the doubt, whose neutrality was not a managed performance, but an honest reflection of an unresolved private assessment, arriving at a resolved position. And the position staring at them on the face is not something worth siding with Meghan. What changed their mind is described by sources in terms that are consistent with the nature of the allegations themselves. The financial dimension apparently registered with particular force with this individual. These specific questions around the use of resources and relationships during the period of royal membership, because this individual has enough institutional knowledge and enough proximity to the specific matters in question to assess the credibility of the claims in a way that someone with only general awareness of the situation could not. They made their assessment and concluded it. The third category of senior royals whose position has shifted is less dramatic in the manner of the shift, but more significant in its breadth. A number of figures who were never particularly warm toward the Sussexes, but who maintained the institutional discipline of visible neutrality, have apparently dropped even the pretense of that discipline in their private communications and private conduct. The briefings coming from multiple senior royal directions simultaneously are the clearest evidence of this. Stories that required sources at a level of institutional seniority that junior aides and communication staff cannot provide. Details that could only be known to people in the rooms where the relevant conversations happen. Contextual information that shapes the public reporting in ways that unmistakably reflect the perspective of people who were there and who have decided that the time for protecting the neutrality of their public position has passed. The coordination of these briefings is the detail that sources outside the palace find most striking, because uncoordinated individual decisions to begin briefing would produce a scattered pattern. Different details in different outlets at different times with the slightly inconsistent character of information coming from people who are not operating from a shared understanding of what is to be communicated and when. What is happening instead is more consistent, more synchronized. Details appear across multiple outlets with a coherence that suggests not a single coordinating source, but a shared sense among multiple sources of what the moment requires and what they are each willing to contribute to the public record. That coherence is either the product of explicit coordination or of something more organic but equally significant. A genuine convergence of senior royal opinion around the new allegations that is producing, without formal orchestration, a unified direction of travel in how that opinion is being expressed. Both possibilities communicate the same thing to the Sussex camp. They are alike to varying degrees. The institution's internal consensus on Meghan has shifted at a level and with a breadth that the previous years of managed neutrality did not reflect, and that the Sussex communications machinery is not equipped to counter. Now, what is the cost effect to the people whose positions have swerved? The most immediate cost is relational. Harry is watching the senior figures in the family he grew up inside turn against the woman he chose. Some of those figures are people he has known his entire life, people whose opinions he was raised to respect, people whose views of his wife are not something he can easily write off as institutional hostility from figures he has already distanced himself from. The ones who are genuinely neutral, who he knew to not be reflexively hostile. Their turn lands differently from the confirmation of positions he already knew existed. It came in a different way altogether, and Harry, whatever else has changed about his life and his perspective, is someone who, on some level, still knows the difference between the family's institutional management of a difficult situation and the private conclusions of people who genuinely know things he may not have full access to. The senior royals have turned, at a cost to their relationships with Harry, at a cost to the managed appearance of family neutrality. They have turned anyway, and that choice, made at that cost, tells you more about what they believe about the new allegations than any official statement ever could. This was their statement. Meghan's position, facing a palace united against her ears.
There is one brave young man in this room who wants to come and say what he thinks the importance of International Women's Day is. I know there's going to be one of you.
There's a specific and identifiable moment in every long-running institutional conflict when the balance tips past the point of recovery, not the point of no return for the relationship. That point came earlier. The Oprah interview, the documentary, the memoir, those were the moments when the relationship between Meghan and the royal family became something that could only be managed, never genuinely repaired. This is a different and in some ways more serious point. The point where the institution stops managing the conflict from a position of reluctant neutrality and starts managing it from a position of aligned opposition. Meghan has reached that junction, and the difference between those two institutional postures, for someone in her position, is the difference between navigating a difficult situation with some room still available to maneuver and navigating one where the walls have closed in on every side simultaneously. Let's be honest with our reviews. Because the abstract language of palace opposition and institutional alignment does not fully capture the concrete reality of what Meghan is now facing. It's a different ballgame altogether. When the palace was managing the Sussex situation from reluctant neutrality, there were things it would not do, stories it would not brief, sources it would not activate, pressure, it would not apply to the media relationships, the commercial partnerships, and the public positioning that the Sussex brand depends on. Not because of warmth toward Meghan, but because the cost of being seen to actively work against a member of the family, however estranged, exceeded whatever it would have gained from the effort. That calculation has changed. The palace is no longer operating from the position of reluctant neutrality. Multiple senior royals are now briefing. The institutional restraint that kept certain information protected and certain sources quiet has been relaxed in ways that are producing a different quality of coverage. More specific, more detailed, more clearly informed by people with genuine inside knowledge rather than the general background awareness that anonymous sources in this space so often provide. Meghan's communications team is aware of this. Sources familiar with the Sussex camp describe an atmosphere of active monitoring of what is being said and where it is coming from. An awareness that the briefing landscape has shifted and that the stories now appearing in reliable outlets are not the product of the usual hostile commentary circuit, but of something closer to the institution itself. That awareness has produced its own defensive response. The Sussex communications approach in the current period has been described as more aggressive than in previous cycles, more direct in pushing back on specific claims, more willing to engage with details rather than simply issuing general denials that decline to address the substance. But aggressive communications against a palace that has decided to brief is not a symmetrical fight, because the palace's sources have standing that Meghan's pushback cannot easily undermine. When a journalist has a senior royal source for a specific claim, a spokesperson denial from the Sussex team does not neutralize the source. It creates a he said, she said dynamic in which the source's institutional standing and the specificity of their knowledge generally wins the credibility contest with a general audience. Meghan understands this. She has understood it since the beginning of the Sussex public communication strategy, which is why the original approach was designed to bypass the palace's standing entirely, to go directly to the public, to the Netflix audience, to the Oprah moment, to the channels where the palace's institutional authority does not automatically translate into credibility superiority. That strategy worked when the palace was maintaining its neutrality, because a neutral institution is not briefing against you. It is not activating its sources. It is not directing its internal knowledge toward the production of a counter-narrative with the standing and the credibility that the palace can bring to bear when it chooses to. Now, it is choosing to. And the channels Meghan built to bypass palace authority are not designed to counter palace authority that is actively deployed. They are designed for a different kind of fight. And this is a different kind of fight. The Harry dimension of this is the one that sources keep returning to as the most significant and the most uncertain element of the current situation. Why that is so, I don't know. Because Harry is not a spectator in this. He is at the center of it, in the position of a man whose relationship with the institution he left depends on his relationship with Meghan remaining intact, and whose relationship with the senior figures who have now turned depends on those senior figures' assessment of Meghan not being shared at some level by Harry himself. The question nobody is willing to ask Harry directly, and that he has not been willing to answer publicly, is what he actually knows about the substance of the new allegations, not what he is saying publicly. What he knows, what the people closest to him, people who were present for things that are now being documented and reported, have told him. What private conversations he has had with family members, whose assessment of his wife has shifted and who may, in those conversations, have said things that go beyond the public record. Sources close to the situation describe Harry as occupying a position of visible private strain, not the specific strain of someone who has just received genuinely shocking new information, something more complicated than that. The strain of someone who is managing an increasingly difficult reconciliation between what he has said publicly, which is total and unconditional, and what the accumulating weight of evidence and family response is privately requiring him to sit with. That reconciliation is becoming harder. The senior royals who have turned are not people Harry can dismiss the way he has learned to dismiss the reflexively hostile voices. Their assessment of his wife carries a weight that his public positioning cannot entirely absorb. And Meghan is watching this. She watches everything. She is aware of the strain Harry is carrying, aware of the conversations he is having that she may not be fully privy to, aware that the united front they have presented to the world since their departure depends on Harry's public commitment remaining as unconditional as it has always appeared. The question of whether that commitment is as unconditional in private as it is in public is one that the current situation is putting under more pressure than any previous development has managed to generate. Her leverage in this situation, the leverage she has always had with Harry, is the relationship itself. The life they have built, the children they share, the shared project of the post-royal existence that would be unlivable for both of them if the foundational alliance between them cracked in any serious way. But leverage that depends on nothing else shifting becomes more fragile with every senior royal that turns, with every credible new account that surfaces, with every private conversation Harry has with people whose opinion he cannot fully discount. Meghan is truly a fighter, one of a kind. She has survived everything the palace has thrown at her before: the hostile press, the legal battles, the public opinion cycles, the institutional indifference. What she has not faced before is a palace unified, briefing, active, deploying its most credible voices in the same direction at the same time. This is a unique institution from the one she has been battling against, and her playbook, which was specially built for the previous version, may not be adequate for this one. There is a dynamic to it. What this means for the monarchy and for the Sussex's future. Let's take a few steps back, past the specific allegations, past the individual senior royals and the nature of their turns, past Meghan's communication strategy, Harry's private strain, and the palace briefings that are producing a different quality of coverage than anything the previous years of managed neutrality allowed. Step all the way back and look at what this moment actually represents in the longer story of the British monarchy and the people at the center of this chapter of it. Because what is happening has gone beyond a family conflict reaching a level of intensity. It is not just another cycle in the Sussex saga that has consumed so much institutional energy and public attention since the departure. It is something with a longer horizon and a more permanent shape than any of the individual incidents that have led to it. It is the closing of a chapter, in the opening of one that looks very different from anything that has come before. For the monarchy itself, the unusual unity of senior royals around the new allegations produces something the institution has not had in its relationship with the Sussex situation since the departure: a coherent internal position. Not managed neutrality that different people were interpreting and applying in different ways according to their individual assessment of the situation. A shared view, arrived from multiple directions, held with enough conviction that the institutional discipline of public neutrality has given way to the more active stance that is now visible in the briefings, the withdrawals, and the shifted body language of shared occasions. That coherence is valuable to the institution. An institution divided internally on a sensitive question of this nature is an institution whose communications are inherently inconsistent, where different sources produce different stories and the overall picture the public receives is one of a family at war with itself rather than one that has arrived at a shared understanding of a difficult situation. What is emerging now is different, more unified, more directed, and in institutional terms, more stable as a foundation for managing whatever comes next. In the Sussex story, it has a different perspective from what was known, but coherence around opposition to Meghan is not without its own complications for the monarchy. The most significant of these involves Harry, because the institution cannot be coherently united against Meghan without that unity having implications for its relationship with her husband. And its relationship with Harry is not something the monarchy can afford to be indifferent to indefinitely. Harry remains in the line of succession. His children are in the line of succession. The institutional and constitutional relationships that connect him to the crown do not dissolve because the palace has turned against his wife. They persist. And managing those persistent connections while the internal consensus around his wife has shifted to active opposition is a complexity that the institution's current coherence does not resolve. It creates it. The long-term question of Harry's path is the one that sits underneath everything happening right now, and that nobody inside those walls has a clean answer to. If he stands fully and publicly with Meghan through this, if the private strain that sources describe produces no visible crack in the united front, if he continues to be the unconditional public defender of the woman against whom the palace is now deploying its most credible voices. The institution's relationship with him becomes more difficult. The path back, which has always been narrow and complicated, but has technically remained a path, narrows further. The senior royals who have turned against Meghan will find it increasingly difficult to separate their view of her from their relationship with the man who defends her without reservation. And Harry has staked his entire post-royal identity on being that man. On the unconditional nature of his commitment being the thing that distinguishes his choices from weakness or manipulation, or the behavior of someone who did not know what he was doing when he burned every bridge behind him. But if the private strain produces something visible, the weight of what the senior royals know and are now expressing, combined with whatever Harry knows privately about the substance of the allegations, produces a moment where the united front develops a crack. Everything changes. For both of them, in ways that cannot be managed back into the previous shape. For the Sussex brand, the implications of the current situation are severe regardless of which direction the Harry question resolves in. The brand's entire commercial proposition rests on a narrative. Two people of conscience and integrity who made an extraordinarily difficult choice because the institution they were leaving was not capable of the honesty and the decency that their values required. That narrative is what Netflix bought, what Spotify bought in its time, what every commercial relationship in the post-royal chapter has been built on at some level. The new allegations attack that narrative at its foundation, not by arguing that the institution they left was fine. The institution's own record on that front is complicated enough that the Sussex critique of it retains some credibility, regardless of what emerges about Meghan personally. But by introducing the possibility that the person presenting herself as a figure of integrity and conscience was, in certain specific and documented respects, well, neither of those things. You cannot sell integrity from a position of documented questions about the conduct that integrity is supposed to describe. The commercial proposition collapses not because the audience is asked to like the palace, but because the audience is asked to continue believing in the person who is selling them something. And selling something while credible voices are raising specific documented questions about your conduct in exactly the areas your product depends on is not a viable commercial position. Netflix is watching this. The commercial relationships that have survived the previous Sussex difficulties are watching this. The American political and cultural adjacencies that were supposed to power the next chapter of the Sussex project are watching this. And what they are watching is a unified palace. Credible senior royal sources, specific documented allegations, and a communications response from the Sussex camp that is more aggressive than in previous cycles, but is fighting on terrain that does not favor them. The evaluation of what this means for existing in future Sussex commercial relationships is happening in real time. Quietly, without announcements, in the particular way that commercial decisions of this sensitivity are always made in these worlds. Not with press releases, but with the slow withdrawal of enthusiasm and the gradual drying up of the conversations that would have become the next project. And then there is the question that sits at the very center of everything. That all of the commercial implications and the institutional dynamics and the Harry question and the palace briefings are ultimately in the service of answering. When the palace speaks with one voice against you, when the senior royals whose previous neutrality gave you a certain protection withdraw that neutrality simultaneously, when the allegations are specific, documented, and corroborated at a level that previous claims about you were not. Is there a version of your story that the world is itching to hear? For Meghan, the answer depends on things she cannot fully control. On Harry, on the legal strength of the suppression infrastructure around the most damaging specific details, on whether the commercial relationships that have survived so far continue to survive, on whether the American audience that has been her most reliable source of sympathy and support is finally, after everything, beginning to reassess. The palace has never officially delivered a verdict on Meghan Markle. It will not. That is not how it operates. It does not hold press conferences to announce its conclusions about individuals who have left its formal orbit. It has a greater effect than that. It withdraws, it briefs, It allows the accumulated weight of what it knows to surface through the channels available to it in the particular way that institutions of this age and this sophistication have always communicated the things they will never officially confirm. And right now, those channels are gearing towards one source. The verdict has not been spoken. It has simply become impossible to miss for reasons one may not understand. The palace will never hold a press conference. It will never issue a formal statement. It will never officially confirm what its senior members now privately believe about Meghan Markle. There are weightier matters. The briefings are running. The neutrality is gone. The senior royals who once extended the benefit of the doubt have withdrawn it simultaneously and without apology. There is no rumor about that. It's purely a judgment, delivered plainly in the language this institution has hopes on. Silence replaced by action, neutrality replaced by direction, by protection replaced by exposure. The palace has made its utterance, just not out loud. This is far from over.